The observation window of Kepler Station showed nothing but gray. Dr. Jinho pressed his palm against the cold glass and stared at the dead planet below. Terramorph 9 looked like a wound that would never heal. The surface was scarred with burn marks, pockmarked with crater after crater. Even from orbit, he could see the chemical stains that made the atmosphere shimmer with toxic colors. This was where the Vorgrath Empire had tested their weapons for 50 years. This was a graveyard. Jinho was 48 years old, but standing here, he felt much older. His dark hair had begun to gray at the temples, and deep lines creased the corners of his eyes. Those lines were not from smiling. They were from years of fighting to save something that most people had already decided was dead. Earth's forests had burned away before he turned 30. He had spent the next 20 years trying to grow things in ash and dust, watching governments care more about money than about breathing air. In the end, he had given up on Earth. Now the Galactic Council had given him a job that everyone understood was a punishment disguised as work. Ceremonial Custodian of Terramorph 9. That was his official title. It meant nothing. It paid nothing. It was meant to keep him occupied and forgotten while the bureaucrats decided what to do with one more human refugee who refused to go quietly into whatever future they had planned for humanity. The door to the observation deck slid open. Nari stepped through, holding 2 cups of coffee. She was younger than Jinho by nearly 15 years, with sharp eyes and a practical face that showed no patience for poetry or dreams. She had been Jinho's friend for 3 years, ever since they had both arrived on Kepler Station, with nowhere else to go. "You are really going down there," Nari said. It was not a question. She handed him one of the cups and stood beside him at the window, both of them looking down at the dead world. "They gave me a habitat dome," Jinho said quietly. "I might as well use it." "They gave you a habitat dome because they want you to disappear," Nari said. Her voice was kind, but it was also honest. "Down there, away from the station, away from people who might sympathize with you. Do you understand that?" Jinho nodded slowly. He understood perfectly, but he did not care any more about what people understood or what they intended. He had seen something in the data files, in the chemical compositions and soil samples. He had seen something that no one else bothered to look for. Underneath the poison and the death, there was still something that could be saved. "I'm going to make it cozy," he said. Nari turned to look at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You are going to do what?" "Make it cozy," Jinho repeated. "That is what I am calling my habitat. The cozy, because that is what it will be. A place where things can grow. A place that feels like home." Nari closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against the window. "You are insane," she said, but she said it softly, the way she might speak to someone she cared about, not someone she was angry with. "Maybe," Jinho agreed. "But I know how to grow things. That is the one skill I have that the whole galaxy still needs. So I am going to try." The transport shuttle descended through Terramorph 9's upper atmosphere, and the planet below grew larger and larger. From up close, it looked even worse than it had from orbit. The sky was not blue, but a sickly orange-yellow. The air readings showed radiation levels that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. The soil samples indicated everything from plutonium contamination to synthetic poisons that Jinho could not even name. The shuttle touched down in a clearing that had once been a meadow, or at least Jinho imagined it had been a meadow once, before the Vorgrath came. Now it was just ash and twisted metal fragments left from weapons testing. His habitat dome was waiting for him. It was a perfect sphere of reinforced polymer, not large but adequate. Inside it was empty and cold. Jinho walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, feeling the weight of his choice settle on his shoulders like something physical. He had brought 3 containers of seeds with him. They were locked in the cargo hold of the shuttle. They were the most valuable things he owned. Inside those containers were samples of Earth plants modified for extreme environments, plants that could survive in poisoned soil and still grow strong. He had spent the last 2 years collecting them, seed by seed, sample by sample, trading and negotiating, and sometimes just stealing from research centers across human space. Over the next week, Jin-Ho prepared the habitat for long-term residents. He activated the life support systems and the soil processors. He downloaded his research files and began setting up his laboratory equipment in a corner of the main room. Then he stepped outside in his environmental suit and began digging. The first test plot was small, just a few meters square. He filled it with soil he had processed to remove the largest toxins. Then he planted his first seeds. He did not know if they would grow. He did not even know if they should grow, on a world so damaged, in a place so far from everything good. But he had spent enough time waiting for permission to take care of dying things. The soil was cold. The sky above was wrong. The air in his suit tasted like metal and fear. But Jin-Ho planted his seeds anyway, and then he stood up and looked out across the vast dead landscape around him. Somewhere, far above in the station, Nari was probably drinking coffee and shaking her head at his foolishness. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Galactic Council was forgetting that he existed. Here, on this dead world, in this little habitat dome that he had named the Cozy, Jin-Ho was exactly where he wanted to be. He whispered to the seeds beneath his feet, in the way his grandmother had taught him, long ago on a planet that still had rain. "Grow," he said. "Please grow. I know you can do it. I believe in you." The wind that came across Terramorph 9's wasteland was harsh and burned his suit's external sensors. But Jin-Ho did not go inside. He stood there as the sun set, painting the poisoned sky in shades of red and gold, and he waited to see what would happen when you dared to care about something everyone else had abandoned. 2 weeks passed, and nothing happened. The seeds did not grow. The soil remained as dead as before, and Jin-Ho began to wonder if Nari had been right. Perhaps he really was insane. Perhaps he had traveled to the end of the galaxy only to watch his last hope die in the dirt beneath a poisoned sky. Then, on the 15th day, he noticed something small, a green shoot, barely thicker than a hair, pushing up through the cracked soil. Jin-Ho actually laughed out loud when he saw it, something he had not done in so long that the sound felt strange in his own ears. He spent the entire next day just watching it, making sure it was real and not a trick of light on his helmet visor. By the end of the 3rd week, there were 7 shoots. By the end of the month, there were hundreds. The test plot had transformed into a small garden of green, a single splash of color in an ocean of gray and brown. Jin-Ho could not believe it was happening. He recorded data obsessively, measuring growth rates and soil composition changes, but mostly he just sat there and watched his plants reach toward the sky. The satellite connection to the station was slow and often unreliable, but he sent his preliminary results to Nari. He expected her to respond with questions or skepticism. Instead, she simply sent back one message: "Call me." When Jin-Ho's signal finally connected with the station, Nari's face appeared on his screen. She looked tired, as if she had not slept. "Your results are impossible," she said without greeting. "The hybrid cross-species growing protocol you used should not work. The genetic code combinations are unstable." "But they are growing," Jin-Ho said. "I am looking at them right now." "I know they are growing," Nari said. "I have been showing your data to other people. Some think you are lying. Some think your instruments are broken. Some think you have made a major discovery. The botanists are arguing. The genetics researchers are arguing. Everyone is arguing, which means they are taking it seriously." Jin-Ho felt something shift inside him, a small weight lifting. Just knowing that people were paying attention, That his work mattered enough to argue about made everything feel less impossible. Over the next 3 months, Jin-Ho expanded his work. He created new test plots with different variations of his hybrid seeds. Some plots he enriched with earth soil organisms. Others he treated with different chemical neutralizers. He experimented with different watering schedules and light exposures. Slowly, painfully, methodically, he began to understand what these new plants needed to survive in this hostile world. Then, one day, something extraordinary happened. Jin-Ho was taking soil samples from his original test plot when he noticed something unusual. The radiation reading was lower than it had been the month before, much lower. The plants themselves were actually absorbing the radiation from the soil. They were not just surviving in the poison, they were actively cleaning it. He ran the tests again, then a third time because he could not believe the numbers he was seeing. The results were consistent. The hybrid plants were designed by his genetic engineering to be hardy and resistant, but what they were actually doing was far more remarkable. They were eating the poison. They were taking the toxins and breaking them down into harmless components. They were healing the planet itself. This time, when he sent his results to Nari, her response came back in minutes. "Send me everything. Raw data, genetic codes, growth models, everything. This changes everything." The scientific community's response was not what Jin-Ho expected. Yes, there was excitement. Yes, there were messages from research institutions across human space asking questions and demanding access to his work. But there was also fear, and there was anger. Some scientists accused him of manipulating his data. Some said his methodology was flawed. Some suggested that his plants were dangerous and should be destroyed before they could spread. The arguments that Nari had mentioned became louder and more hostile. People began to take sides. Then something happened that no one had predicted. A Vorgrath inspection shuttle descended from the station toward the planet's surface. The Vorgrath were the ones who had signed the contract to use Terramorph 9 as their weapons testing ground. They came here regularly to evaluate the site and plan new testing schedules, but they had never come while Jin-Ho was present. Jin-Ho watched the shuttle land near his habitat dome. 3 figures emerged, each more than 2 meters tall, their exoskeletons covered in patterns that marked their rank and status. The Laid Vorgrath was a commander named Kirel, with scars that ran across his face like marks of honor. Chiral had been coming to Terramorph 9 for 8 years. "Dr. Jin-Ho," Chiral said, his translator converting his deep clicking language into standard speech. "We have heard that you are conducting unauthorized research on this site." Jin-Ho had learned long ago that honesty was sometimes the best strategy with Vorgrath. They appreciated directness. "I am growing plants," he said. "I am making the land better. That is all." Kiril looked past him toward the test plots. His multiple eyes seemed to focus on different parts of the garden simultaneously. "You are doing what the contract explicitly forbids. The land is to remain unsuitable for colonization. The contract pays our empire to maintain it as a testing ground." "I know," Jin-Ho said. He was standing straight, not challenging, but not submitting either. "But the land is becoming unsuitable for testing because I am healing it. Soon there will be nothing here to test weapons on. Then your contract becomes worthless. That is the way contracts work." For a long moment, Kiril did not move. Then, surprisingly, the Vorgrath commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "You are using economics against us," Kiril said. "You are claiming that we cannot use this land because you are making it too alive to be interesting as a weapons range. That is acceptable reasoning." Kiril stepped forward and bent down to examine one of Jin-Ho's plants, his scaled fingers barely touching the stem. "What is your intention?" he asked. "To make this world green again," Jin-Ho said. "To prove that even the most damaged places can heal. To show that there is another way besides weapons and testing and making things dead." Kirel straightened, his height making him tower over Jin-Ho. "That is a very human thing to believe," the Vorgrath said. "We will observe your progress with interest. If your plants work, the military value of this site changes. That means the contract needs renegotiation. That means everything changes." As Kirel walked back toward his shuttle, Jin-Ho realized that nothing would ever be simple again. He had started something that would eventually reach far beyond his small garden, far beyond this dead planet. He had proven that change was possible. Now he would have to live with all the consequences that came with that proof. Behind him, in the soil of Terramorph 9, thousands more seeds were waiting to grow. 6 months after Jin-Ho's first green shoot pushed through the poisoned soil, the transformation of Terramorph 9 had become undeniable. What had started as a single test plot had expanded into vast fields of living green. Jin-Ho had automated much of the work, creating a network of seed dispensers that spread his hybrid plants across the planet's surface in carefully calculated patterns. From orbit, the dead world was beginning to show veins of color, like life returning to a frozen corpse. The scientific community that had doubted him was now divided into 2 camps. Some researchers wanted to study his work, to learn the secrets of his hybrid plants, so they could apply them to other damaged worlds across the galaxy. Others wanted to shut him down, claiming his methods were untested and potentially dangerous. The debate had reached the highest levels of the Galactic Council, and Jin-Ho's name was now spoken in corridors where decisions were made that affected billions of lives. But Jin-Ho himself remained on the surface, in his small habitat dome, doing the same thing he had always done. He worked, he planted, he observed. He adjusted his formulas based on what he learned. The outside noise seemed far away, muted by distance and by his own focus on the work in front of him. It was during this period that Lyra arrived. She stepped out of the transport shuttle in a standard environmental suit, her Keithian form making the suit look oversized and awkward. Keithians were an analytical species, known throughout the galaxy for their intelligence and their complete lack of what other species called emotion. Where humans felt, Keithians calculated. Where humans dreamed, Keithians analyzed. They were excellent scientists and terrible artists. They made perfect soldiers and terrible friends. Lyra introduced herself with efficient brevity. "I am Lyra. I have been assigned to document your research methods and assess the validity of your results. I will need access to all your data, your seed samples, and your daily observations." "Welcome," Jin-Ho said, and he meant it. He had been alone for 6 months, and while he did not mind solitude, he found himself hungry for conversation. "I will show you everything." Over the following weeks, Jin-Ho worked while Lyra observed and recorded. She was quiet, efficient, and asked questions with the precision of a blade cutting through flesh. She did not make small talk. She did not comment on whether his work was beautiful or impressive or meaningful. She simply gathered data and ran calculations and cross-referenced everything against the scientific literature. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Jin-Ho was outside, tending to a section of garden that had begun to show signs of fungal infection. He was kneeling in the soil, his hands moving carefully through the plants, removing the infected leaves and applying a treatment he had developed to encourage the healthy plants around it to take over. He was working slowly, carefully, and as he worked, he was singing. It was an old song, something his mother had taught him when he was very young. He had not sung in years, and his voice was rough and uncertain, but the words came back to him, and he sang them to the plants, to the soil, to the strange orange sky above. When he finished, he realized Lyra was standing nearby, watching him. "Why are you producing sound vibrations?" she asked. "The plants cannot process auditory information. They respond to light, water, nutrient levels, and soil composition." "Singing serves no function." Jinho sat back on his heels and looked up at her. "It serves a function for me," he said. "I sing because it reminds me why I am doing this. It reminds me that this is not just data and results. This is about caring for something. This is about believing that caring matters." Lyra processed this response for a long moment. For a Kethian, a long moment could stretch to several minutes, while her mind worked through multiple logical paths. "That is an inefficient explanation," she finally said. "But it is also interesting." Over the next few weeks, Lyra began to change. Jinho did not notice it at first, but gradually he realized that she was asking different questions. Instead of only asking about mechanisms and results, she began asking about his intentions. Why had he chosen this particular hybrid combination? Why had he predicted that the plants would show this specific growth pattern? What had he hoped would happen? One day, Jinho found her standing in the garden at sunset, watching the light turn the sky shades of orange and purple. It was inefficient. It served no practical purpose. She was simply standing there, observing, without recording data. "Are you learning something?" Jinho asked. "I am confused," Lyra said. "I do not understand why you chose to come to this world. Logically, you should have sought employment with a research institution. You should have pursued resources and recognition. Instead, you came to a dead planet and planted seeds knowing there was a high probability of failure." "I came because I needed to try," Jinho said. "Because not trying would have been worse than failing." "That is not logical," Lyra said. "No," Jinho agreed. "It is not logical, but it works." Meanwhile, on the station above, Nari had been fighting a different kind of battle. She had been presenting Jinho's results to the council representatives and arguing that his work should be protected, expanded, and recognized as one of the most important scientific achievements in recent history. She had made enemies among the mining companies and weapons manufacturers who feared what a healed Terramorph 9 might mean for their contracts. But she had also gathered supporters among the peaceful species, among the researchers who believed in the potential of what Jinho was doing. Then, Nari received a message from the Vorgrath. Commander Karel himself had submitted a report to the Galactic Council stating that Terramorph 9 was no longer suitable as a weapons testing ground due to unexpected biological colonization. The report was technically accurate. It was also, Nari realized, a gift. Kirel had found a way to break the weapons contract by redefining the land itself. He was using bureaucracy to protect what Jinho was building. When Nari told Jinho about it, he simply said, "Maybe Kirel is learning something too." By the end of the 6th month, Terramorph 9 looked like a different world. From orbit, it was not fully green, but it was no longer entirely dead. Life was spreading. The radiation levels were dropping, the air was becoming breathable, and in his small habitat dome, Jinho continued his work with Lyra beside him. A Kethian scientist who had somehow learned to smile, and with Nari's voice coming through the communication system, keeping him connected to the world beyond, fighting to protect what he was building. The garden was growing, and so, it seemed, were they all. The Galactic Council chamber was vast, a space designed to hold delegates from hundreds of different species. Species that breathed methane sat next to species that needed constant electrical charge. Species with traditional bodies sat beside beings of pure light contained in specially designed barriers. And now, for the first time in years, they were all arguing about the same thing: Dr. Jinho and his garden. Councillor Park Tae-sung stood before the assembly, human like Jinho, but unlike him in almost every other way. Park had spent his entire life in politics, learning to speak in ways that made others believe what he wanted them to believe. His clothes were expensive, his smile was practiced, and his words were weapons carefully aimed at the council members around him. What we have witnessed on Terramorph 9 is not merely a scientific curiosity. Park said, his voice carrying across the chamber with precision. We have witnessed human ingenuity at its finest. A single human, armed with nothing but knowledge and determination, has transformed what all of us declared to be a worthless waste of space into a living world. He has proven what humanity can achieve when we are given the chance to build instead of to destroy. The audience shifted. Some species made sounds of agreement. Others made sounds of disagreement. The Vorgrath delegation sat in silence, which Park took as a positive sign. Silence from the Vorgrath usually meant they were considering. But then Counselor Jex from the Vorgrath Military Committee stood. Jex was massive, even by Vorgrath standards, with armor that had been modified 100 times over a career that spanned 5 decades of service. His voice, when he spoke, made even other Vorgrath listen carefully. The human scientist has violated the terms of our weapons testing contract, Jex said. Terramorph 9 was designated as a testing facility, and that facility has been compromised. We accept this loss because the human has done us a favor by removing the contamination from the land. It shows the effectiveness of organic remediation techniques that we can now apply to our own military installations. However, the genetic codes that created these plants belong to us. The human was working on our contract site. The intellectual property is ours. The chamber erupted. Different species began demanding the right to speak simultaneously, and the air filled with translation overlays that made conversation sound like organized chaos. Park waited for the noise to subside, then spoke again. The human scientist acted outside any contract. He was stationed on that planet as a custodian, not as a military research asset. The plants he created are his intellectual property. To claim them otherwise would be to commit theft on a scale the Galactic Council has never before tolerated. They are more valuable than you understand, Jex said quietly, a statement that somehow cut through all the other noise. We have tested them. The plants actively repair damage at a molecular level. They can be weaponized. They can be turned into tools of war as easily as they have been turned into tools of peace. We will not relinquish that potential. On Terramorph 9, Jinho learned about the political battle through a message from Nari. She was careful with her words, knowing that others might be listening. But the message was clear. The Vorgrath wanted his work. The Galactic Council was divided on what to do about it, and Jinho needed to decide what he wanted to do. He read the message twice, then looked at Lyra. They want to turn my plants into weapons, he said. Yes, Lyra said. She had access to the same council broadcasts that Nari had. The Vorgrath military wants to apply the genetic codes to create plants that can be deployed as combat organisms. They can be modified to produce toxins instead of consuming them. They can be adapted to grow rapidly and overwhelming in hostile territories. The potential military applications are extensive. What do you think I should do? Jinho asked. Lyra processed the question. She had learned to do this differently in the months she had spent with Jinho. She no longer simply calculated probabilities. She thought about what she had learned about caring for things, about believing in the future, even when it was uncertain. I think, she said slowly, that you should refuse them. I think you should keep your work for the purpose it was intended. I think you should make it clear that some things should not be turned into weapons. And I think that I should contact my government and tell them that I will not participate in this work if it becomes militarized, even though it will cost me everything I have achieved among my people. Jinho looked at her with gratitude and sadness. I cannot ask you to do that, he said. You did not ask, Lyra said. I am choosing. You taught me that choice matters. You taught me that caring about something means sometimes saying no to safety and security. I will choose to care about what you have built instead of about my own advancement. In the council chamber, Park Tae-sung received a message from Jinho. It was short and clear. Tell them no. Tell them these plants exist to heal, not to harm. Tell them that I am willing to defend that position to the end. Park read the message and felt something shift in his chest. This human scientist, alone on a dead world, was willing to stand against the Vorgrath military. It was insane. It was impossible. It was also exactly what the galaxy needed to see. Park stood again. "The scientist himself has responded," Park said. "He will not surrender his work. He will not allow it to be weaponized. The plants he has created will remain tools of healing, not of destruction." "Then we will take them by force," Zek said simply. "We will send military forces to Terramorph 9 and seize the scientist and his work." But before the Vorgrath could move forward with this plan, Nari acted. She had anticipated this possibility. She had already uploaded encrypted copies of all of Jinho's genetic codes to secure servers scattered across neutral territory. She had created digital backups that could not be seized or destroyed. She had prepared for this moment when the powerful would decide they wanted to take what Jinho had built. When the Council learned what Nari had done, they realized that seizing Jinho would not seize his work. The knowledge was already too widespread to be controlled. The Vorgrath military's advantage had evaporated. "There is another path," Kirill said, standing to address the Council. The military commander surprised everyone by speaking against his own military committee. "We can obtain access to the genetic codes through legitimate scientific channels. We can negotiate with the human scientist directly. We can learn from him rather than taking from him. This will take longer, but the results will be better. And we will not have made an enemy of every peaceful species in the galaxy in the process." The chamber fell silent. The Vorgrath military was accustomed to taking what they wanted, but Kirill was suggesting something different. Something almost like cooperation. In the end, it was not a perfect solution, but it was a solution that allowed everyone to move forward without open warfare. The Vorgrath agreed to cease aggressive action. The Galactic Council agreed to protect Jinho's intellectual property. And Jinho, on his world of healing gardens, agreed to share his knowledge with researchers from across the galaxy, with one condition: no military applications. Nari sent him a message with only 5 words: "You changed the game." But Jinho was not thinking about games or politics. He was thinking about his plants, growing larger and stronger every day. He was thinking about Lyra, who had chosen friendship over security. He was thinking about the work that still lay ahead, the healing that still needed to happen. The political storm had passed over him, but Jinho remained rooted, like his plants, in the soil of Terramorph 9, growing stronger and deeper every day. The blockade came without warning, though Nari had predicted it might. The Vorgrath military, unhappy with the Council's decision and unwilling to accept Kirill's more diplomatic approach, decided to take matters into their own hands. They established a barrier around Kepler Station and the surrounding space. Nothing came in. Nothing went out. The station was cut off from the supply chains that kept it functioning, and with it, cut off, were all communications to the scientists working on Terramorph 9. On the planet below, Jinho noticed the silence first. Messages from Nari, which had been arriving regularly, stopped coming. The data feeds from the station that he used to monitor the political situation simply ended. For 3 days, there was nothing but static on every communication channel he tried. "We are isolated," Lyra said, stating the obvious with the precision that Kethians brought to all statements. Jinho nodded slowly. He had known this was a possibility. He had even planned for it in his way. But knowing something was possible was different from experiencing it. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like the pressure of the poisoned atmosphere against the walls of his habitat dome. "How long can we survive?" Lyra asked. "The life support will function for 90 days before requiring replacement parts I do not have," Jinho said. "We have food stored for 60 days. We have water from the filtration system for as long as the power lasts." "The garden," Lyra said, looking out at the fields beyond their dome. We can eat from the garden. The garden is not fully developed, Jin-Ho said. The plants are not large enough to provide sufficient nutrition. Not yet. But as he spoke, he realized that they did not need to survive long. The Vorgrath blockade was a siege, and sieges could be broken by the person under siege if they were clever enough. Jin-Ho had already designed his plants to be resilient and adaptive. It was time to push them toward a new adaptation. He began to work with an intensity that surprised even Lyra. He modified his seed formulas to accelerate growth rates. He created new variations optimized for rapid nutrient production. He worked through the night and into the day, stopping only when his body simply refused to continue. "You are pushing yourself to the point of damage," Lyra observed, with what might have been concern if Cathians were capable of concern. "I know," Jin-Ho said, "but we may not have another choice." Then, 2 weeks into the blockade, something unexpected happened. A message came through on a hidden emergency channel that Nari had installed years ago, specifically for situations like this. The signal was weak and degraded, but the message was clear. "They are demanding I give them your genetic codes. I will not. I have hidden everything I can. They have cut all supplies to the station. We have maybe 3 months before we start running out of food, but we are not surrendering. Neither should you." Jin-Ho understood what was happening. The Vorgrath military was trying to starve them into submission. They were trying to force Jin-Ho to surrender his work by threatening the entire station above. He called Lyra to his laboratory. "I have something to show you," he said. He pulled up his seed dispersal system on the screen. This was designed to spread seeds across the planet slowly, carefully, over time. But it can be reconfigured for rapid dispersal. I can launch thousands of seed pods across the entire surface of Terramorph 9 simultaneously. Within days, the entire planet will be covered with new growth. "The plants are not ready," Lyra said. "The growth models show that they will not have adequate nutrient density for at least 3 more months." "I know," Jin-Ho said, "but they will grow fast. Faster than anything we have ever tried. They will take what we have learned and accelerate it. And if only half of them survive, we will have enough food to sustain us." "The question is whether you are willing to do this." Lyra understood what he was really asking. If they did this, if they accelerated the growth beyond what was scientifically proven to be safe, they might create an ecological disaster. They might create unstable plants that spread unpredictably. They might make the situation worse instead of better. "Yes," Lyra said, "I will help you. Let us break the siege." That night, Jin-Ho launched his seeds into the wind. The dispersal system filled the sky with white pods, thousands upon thousands of them, spreading across Terramorph 9's surface like snow falling from a dark cloud. The pods carried his modified seeds to every corner of the dead world, to places where nothing had yet grown, to regions where the soil was still poisoned and the air was still foul. For 3 days, nothing seemed to happen. Then the plants began to grow. They grew faster than anything that had grown before. They grew with a hunger that was almost aggressive, their roots driving deep into the soil, their leaves spreading wide to catch the light. They grew in configurations that Jin-Ho had not predicted, creating networks of interconnected growth that supported each other. They grew like living things possessed by the need to survive. And they worked. The plants pulled radiation from the soil faster than expected. They converted toxic chemicals into neutral compounds with remarkable efficiency. They spread across Terramorph 9 like an organic army, reclaiming the world sector by sector. Within 10 days, something remarkable happened. The plants began to produce fruit, bulbous growths that hung heavy from the branches, containing seeds and nutrients and everything needed to sustain life. Jin-Ho's modified plants had accelerated their own reproductive cycle, adapting to the crisis he had created for them. "They are learning," Lyra said. watching the data streams showing the plant's growth patterns. Or perhaps, more accurately, they are responding to the genetic programs you embedded in them. But the response is more sophisticated than anything we anticipated. Jinho and Lyra ventured outside and picked the fruit from the closest plants. It was still warm from the sun and it tasted strange and slightly bitter, nothing like earth fruit. But it was food, and it was abundant. "We can eat this," Lyra said. "We will survive." Word of what Jinho had done reached the blockading Vorgrath forces. They reported that Terramorph 9 had suddenly erupted into massive plant growth. They reported that the radiation levels across the planet had dropped precipitously. They reported that the weapons testing site had transformed into a living jungle. Commander Carell received this report and made a decision. He contacted his military committee and explained that Terramorph 9 was no longer suitable as a weapons testing ground. The planet had become too alive. The contamination had become too organic. The site was no longer of tactical value. It was bureaucratic maneuvering at its finest. Kirel was using the military's own logic against them, declaring the site unsuitable by redefining what unsuitable meant. Within a week, the blockade began to lift. The Vorgrath military withdrew. They no longer had a contract to enforce, and they no longer had a valid reason to maintain a siege against a planet that no longer served their purposes. When communications with the station were finally restored, Nari's first message was, "I knew you would find a way. Welcome to the free world, Jinho." On Terramorph 9, surrounded by the impossible green of his garden's rebirth, Jinho stood with Lyra and watched the sky. The orange haze was beginning to clear. Somewhere far above, the blockade was ending, and below their feet, in the soil that had once been dead, millions of plants were reaching toward the future.